And with the inevitable whoosh and womb of the opening notes of the show, we are here. It is Sunday Night AstroLive. Welcome to another edition. And here we are. It has been a really intense week on the astrological tip, on the symbolic tip. Uh, Uranus and Gemini has brought us no lack of content. I can tell you that right now. I mean, this has been a veritable gold mine, and it's gonna with these outer planets going to be the gift that keeps on giving, and we're here to bring it to you all. So, in case you're new to the show, my name is Robert Phoenix. If you're in the chat and you're new, say hello. The people here are super cool and very welcoming, and you'll feel right at home in no time. And yeah, how's everyone doing tonight? Are we uh, are we hip and happy? The vibe here in Kerrville is still rather strange. I have to be completely honest. There's some parts of the town now where they're starting to put up crosses for people who died, and there's a memorial wall downtown, which I've yet to see, but I'm going to go pay a visit to it and take some photos of it. But yesterday we were kind of touring down by the river, ground zero for Kerrville, not ground zero. I really feel like ground zero for the flood itself was the Hunt area and Ingram, but really Hunt was it was almost as if Hunt found himself surfing at Mavericks all of a sudden, right? If you don't if you don't know what Mavericks is, it's a place that's not too far away from Half Moon Bay. And one day there was a guy who was at Half Moon Bay High School, and I think Half Moon Bay High School sits on a hill. It's actually a beautiful high school, and I think he brought his binoculars or something one day, and he could see this enormous swell that was sort of off to the northwest a little bit. And he was a surfer, and he decided to go surf this enormous swell. And he was the first guy out there for a long time. I forget his name, but eventually other people started to come out there, and it became the spot of big wave surfing here in North America. And it would only happen during a certain time of year, and it's called Mavericks. And the waves easily 25 feet, easily, sometimes even bigger. And that's what Hunt was like. It was like all of a sudden people found themselves surfing at Mavericks, but without any boards and without any knowledge that all of a sudden they were in very deep water. And what's going to be really interesting is now all of a sudden there's a lot of news coming out about how poorly, we'll use the word Kerr County, how poorly Kerr County responded to the situation in real time. And the town that I live right next to, I'm kind of on the border of Kerrville and Ingram. And at 4 in the morning, there was a firefighter from Ingram who happened to be in the area because I was getting phone alerts throughout the night. It was National Weather Service. And apparently he did too. And being a resident of this area much longer than I have been, he went out to hunt and he saw what was coming. And he called the Kerrville Emergency Dispatch, and they transferred the call to um, whoever they needed to transfer it to. And this is at 4 in the morning. And the first real response from the Kerr County emergency um, system group people, whatever you want to call them, was at 10 a.m. This is 6 hours later. And by that time, the damage had been done. I mean, I was already up at that time, sort of looking at the river from where I am, which again is maybe about 5 miles downriver from Hunt. And I could see how high the river was. I could see all the debris. And if I had been there at 8 in the morning, it would have been double what I was seeing at 10 or 9:30. And now the reason I'm bringing this up is because we're in a Mercury retrograde period, and this is gonna be a big deal. And I don't want to bore you with a lot of like local political logistics, but there seems to have been a real back burner approach to taking this once in every 25 or 30-year threat seriously. And one of the things that Kerrville has been noted for, and we'll get into the astrology, but this is all Mercury retrograde stuff anyway. One of the things that Kerrville has been noted for is a very strong conservative sort of Tea Party group. And when I used to go to the Tea Party meetings in Fredericksburg, there was a fair amount of people from Kerrville who would attend these meetings. And one of the reasons why their contingency is so strong is because they actually played a major role in stopping the what they call the Trans-America Corridor. So there was an actual plan to run a highway all the way up from Mexico through Texas, through the center of the country, that would reach Canada. And it was going to be pretty much specifically for trucks, freight, right? And this group in Texas, a small group of people, wasn't even like an official group, although I think maybe they had a name or something. And I've actually met a couple of people that were involved. They figured out a way via private property land rights to actually stop this thing in court. So, in as much as their attention to fiscal responsibility might have factored into this disaster, I can't take that win away from them. Right? That was they really did yeoman's work, heavy lifting, and really put a major block in this transcontinental corridor, which was again going to be a part of this whole idea of the North American Union. And I don't even know where that's at right now. We're going to talk a little bit about Calgary and Alberta tonight, who want to leave Canada, and that's also part of a Mercury retrograde discussion we'll be having. Most of it will center on this idea of remigration, which I think is going to be a really, really big deal. And anyway, I just wanted to say that in as much as they may be blamed in some ways for their overflexing of their fiscal responsibility, they also did us a tremendous favor by roadblocking this Trans-America corridor. So I need to be on the record with that. Not a lot of people know that. Um, and I don't know, maybe you can make a case that this is some payback for that. Now we're really going down some rabbit holes here, and I'm not really ready to go there with that. But it's sort of like if you're wired that way and you want less government encroachment on your property and theoretical waste of services, right? There's going to be at some point, uh, I wouldn't necessarily call it an error, but maybe a slight overreach or a slight, I don't want to use the word misappropriation. But what happened is this is a lot of this goes down in Kerrville as people are trying to rein in a lot of this government waste and spending. And I think the genesis of a lot of it begins kind of around pre-Trump, but definitely goes into the post-Trump era of the first Trump term. And people are just sick and tired of government waste, government spending. It's like, and this is a pretty conservative area. So this whole thing with the early warning system kind of gets lost in the sauce over the fact that the, the majority of these people understand that if you give government lots of money, they're not always going to use it in their best interest, that they can be very wasteful, that they can have their own self interest or special interest groups. And as we go back, and this is part of the whole Mercury retrograde thing, we're talking about Kerrville. When you go back and you look at the things that they did or didn't do, um, there are so many missteps and errors along the way, and maybe even uh, a misuse of funds. So during the Biden administration, they had this thing called the American Rescue Plan. And I've talked about this before. This all gets into Mercury retrograde. So just hang in there with me. Um, the Biden administration was offering $10 million to any city that was like 20,000 people or less. And Kerrville clearly qualified for that. At that time, I was in Fredericksburg, and it was a big deal for us in Fredericksburg because Biden was in office, and there was just so little trust in the process at that point, starting with the 2020 election. And how could you blame people? I don't blame them at all. And the difference between Fredericksburg and Kerrville is in some ways like night and day. Fredericksburg is one of the most visited places in the world. If you look at the numbers of people that come to Kerrville, I'm sorry, Fredericksburg every weekend, they'll blow your mind. I mean, per capita, it is one of the top three visited places in the world. I shit you not. So Fredericksburg has found a gold mine. And what's interesting is that Fredericksburg is a tourist city, and it's not too far of an etymological leap from tourist to tourist, right? And they have been raking in the gold by maintaining this idea that it's this cute middle American pristine town with a downtown area that you can walk down the streets and you can kind of feel like you're in another time, another place, um, and people are really drawn to that. In a period where there's so much complexity, and if you go someplace, you may not feel entirely safe in terms of the area that you're in. Fredericksburg is like It's like a sanctuary, right? And then you have the development since the 2010s of the Texas wine industry, which has sprung up outside of Fredericksburg and pretty much all over the hill country. So you have a lot of working wineries that create their own wine. Some do, um, but they also bring in wines from like West Texas, which is actually a wine growing region, and California. But they have enough grapes on their land to qualify as being a winery, and they they get to sell Texas wines as a result of that. And it's more than just wineries. There's distilleries. Uh, we have the Altstadt Brewery, also just outside of Fredericksburg, which is this recreation of an actual German brewery. It's huge, and it's very German. You know, they spent $1 million on all. Now this is private. It's a private industry. It has nothing to do with the government. But they spent $1 million on this system where they take the local water in and then they completely remove all of the elements in the water. They make it like completely blank, zero. And then what they figured out was a certain region in Germany had these trace minerals in the water. And then they reintroduced that level of trace minerals in the water so that they can approximate German water for German beer. I mean, this is how specific this shit gets, right? So when you go there or when you drink their beer, you're drinking as close to an approximation of the German beer as possible. And this place is really, really big. So this whole industry has sort of grown out of Fredericksburg, and Fredericksburg has a shit ton of money. They have a hotel tax, which it's not just hotels now. Of course, it's Airbnbs, and there's plenty of them. And so Fredericksburg didn't really need that American Rescue Plan money. Like that was our contention, and they wanted to send that. They wanted to use that money to create um, more internet infrastructure and lay down fiber optics and go all the way out to a place called Harper, which is unincorporated. And I don't even know where they are with any of that. And that was a while ago. And this is what happens when municipalities accept money. And there's always strings attached, especially with the federal government. And we looked at the contracts for accepting that money, and they were pretty rigorous. Like if you missed a payment window or you didn't self audit uh, over these periods of time, uh, the amount of money that you'd have to pay back was exponential. And for me, it was always a case of, well, if you're using the federal government's money and you're using that to lay down fiber optics, then who owns the fiber optics and who owns what can be said or messaged over the fiber optics? Is it Fredericksburg? Is it Gillespie County? Or is it the federal government who theoretically are the ones who are bankrolling that operation? So these are all big questions for us, and we were adamant that they shouldn't take the money. And in the case of Fredericksburg, honestly, they don't even really need it, But it's kind of like, well, if it's there, we're going to take it. I mean, and that is the attitude of most cities when they're offered federal funds, because the other side of the story is, well, if we don't take it, somebody else will. And this is where Kerrville comes into the picture. They're having the same discussion. And they're having the same discussion amongst their civic leaders and the people here who want them to be fiscally smart and correct. And I think somebody went to John Cornyn, who is not one of the more favored Republican senators here in Texas. He's He's a rhino, if you want to use that terminology. And Cornyn basically said, well, if you don't use it, the money will go to the blue states and they'll use it. And of course, we've been in this kind of soft civil war between the red and the blue. And that kind of changed people's attitudes. And they're like, okay, we'll take the money, but we'll only take 7 million of it. It's like, and I didn't even really understand that. It's like, if you're going to take it, just take the whole fucking thing. You know what I mean? Just take the whole thing. Because they were going to send it back. I mean, literally the money, this is how it worked. The money was there. The federal government put the money. It's not like you had to say, yeah, we're into it and click a button on a on an email or on a .gov site. No, the money was already there. This is how it worked. And so you could either accept it or reject it. And there were people in Kerrville that wanted to send it back. So I guess to strike some kind of a fiscal medium, they said, well, we'll take 7 million of it. We'll send 3 million back. Okay, so they took 7 million and they spent a large portion of it on, and this is where it gets, we're in Mercury retrograde territory again. So I'm talking about this astrologically. It's all about communication. And they took, I think, 5 or 6 million, and they invested it in a upgraded communication system for the sheriff's department and the fire department. Because the one that they currently had was, I suppose, a bit antiquated. But at the same time, when it came to alerting the sheriff's department or the first responders in Kerrville and Kerr County, how well did that work? And I know that they're probably not even part of the same system, but nonetheless, if you're spending between I think it was around $6 million, maybe 5, because there's an apportionment of the money that goes into different areas, which I'll tell you about in a second. But you would think that if they upgraded that system, then that system would have played some role in them being able to respond earlier to what happened in Hunt upriver. And it didn't, right? So why? So how did that work? How did they justify spending that money on a communication system where it takes them 6 hours ultimately to respond? So these are the questions that are now being asked here. It's a very Mercury retrograde kind of situation. And one of the things that they also spent the money on was stipends and raises and bonuses for the sheriff's department. They took $1 million and they kind of threw it at the employees, which honestly, I get it. You know, they do difficult work and here you go, here's your reward. But it's like, that's not what the money was there for. The money wasn't there to reward employees. In fact, I think $600,000 went to civic employees. So that's $1.6 million. And the system that they were talking about, this early warning system, was $1 million. So theoretically, they could have foregone their stipends and bonuses and whatever. And they could have spent that money for this system, but it didn't happen. So there are all these kind of retrograde moments that are leading into this discussion about how this happened and what could have been done to avert some of the catastrophe. You couldn't avert the water. That was going to come. That was going to happen. And historically, this is a floodplain. And, you know, was the weather manipulated? Not by Augustus Dorico, I can tell you that. but Dane Wigington was tracking some of the NextRad stuff, and he said that there was an unusual amount of NextRad activity around this area where they basically can hold systems, right? And this is what happened with Hurricane Harvey. They kind of held it so it could collect more and more and more and more and more moisture. And then ultimately, whether they can steer these things, through the application of HARP, I'll let you decide upon that. I think that they do have tremendous power over the environment, but that would be sort of the meteorological cause of all this, or at least adds into it. Had they had an alarm system in place, as they do in other parts of the country where they do go through things like this, would people, excuse me, pardon me, would they have been able to get up at 4 in the morning and evacuate? Yeah, yeah, they could have, because the majority of that water really hits it around between 5:15 and 5:30 in the morning. So they would have had at least an hour to get the hell out of there. And this is going to be a really interesting Mercury retrograde as they go back and try to rehash these things. The sheriff's department, not available for comment. I guess they have to figure out how they're going to address this. They'll probably spend a lot of time with the city attorney to make sure they get the language right, that they don't indict themselves. Because now we're sort of encroaching into, it hasn't happened yet, but I would not be surprised if at some point uh, there are lawsuits that are filed against either Kerr County or the city of Kerrville. And I'm not sure that a judge would rule kindly upon the people that are bringing the suit to light. I don't know if that's going to work real well on a legal level. But for people that got washed out, lost their lives, livelihoods, lives of their loved ones, where is the recourse? And I don't see the federal government stepping in and saying, "Oh well, here you go. Here's $200,000. Just start over." I just don't see that happening. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the aftermath. There's one other part of the story which is, I think, germane to it, and that the state of Texas, I think they still do. They're going to have to now. But at a certain point, they were actually, there's like a kind of a FEMA version of Texas. It's not FEMA, uh, like U.S. It's like the Texas version of it, and you could actually apply to them for them to do this early warning system. And Kerrville had actually done that at a certain point. I think they may have done it around 2014, something like that, right around 2014. And apparent when they sent it to the state kicked it back to them, and they said, "Well, what is your contingency plan? What's your mitigation and contingency plan?" Because they hadn't included that. They just did an application, which again is very Mercury retrograde. And so they get it back, and then they start to work on, okay, well, we have to have this for a contingency plan. What can we do to mitigate? And they put all that together. And by the time they resubmit it, Harvey happens, and they're way down the list. Like nobody wants to deal with Kerrville in the resubmitted plan, because now you have all these other catastrophes that have happened in Harvey. And this is all looking backwards, right? This is all looking into this kind of chain of events that brought this place to this where it is now. And it's just fascinating to be able to see how There are different agendas involved. There are people who are trying to be fiscally responsible because they've seen governmental waste at an enormous level. There's very little trust uh, based on how the Biden administration's working with the whole immigration policy. Like there was no social contract at that time. It had been broken. The social contract had been completely broken. And when that happens, people tend to get very defensive and they want to circle the wagons and they want to make sure that they're not being fucked with. I understand it. I totally get it. And it's unfortunate that in some ways that's being played out in that certain people were um, favoring saving money and being fiscally conservative over saving lives. I don't think that's a completely valid uh, assessment of the situation. It's more complex than that because there's different layers to it. And looking back on, and there are records of this during the Kerr County commissioners' meetings, right? They had brought this subject up about this early warning system 20 times, and it was never fully addressed. So this is going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. And my feeling, and there's a time and a place for everything, right? But my feeling about what's going on here is, first of all, people are still in a state of shock. Um, they're still quite numb. And the river prior to this flood was a thing of beauty. I mean, honestly, it was one of the reasons why I moved here, other than the fact that I thought this would be a good place for my mother. There were all these services here. We certainly couldn't afford a place in Fredericksburg, so this became the affordable option. And the river was it's a beautiful river. It was. It might still be one of these days after they clear all the debris, the trees, and the wreckage out of there. But that's one of the reasons why people came here. And there were a lot of people who were starting to build along the riverbank, which is probably not a good idea. So it's going to be interesting to see how this place comes back from this. And I just don't know. I just don't know if the leadership is there in order to come out and say, not only are we going to rebuild Kerrville, but we'll make it even better than it was before. And honestly, at a certain point, that's got to be the message. Because I think grief is a vital component to the experience. You can't cheat people out of grief. But where is the turning point? At what point does somebody step in and say, we have found the missing, we have buried the dead, we are in the midst of removing the impediments and the debris that are alongside the river. And we toured it. We went down by the river yesterday, and my God, we saw the remnants of one of these RVs just sliced into chunks, nothing left. And there's plenty of it. And who's responsible for it? Who's responsible for the removal of that debris? The property owner, the city, the county, the state. So there's going to be a natural cycle here of healing, I think, hopefully. But at a certain point, they're going to have to make a pivot, and they're going to have to inspire people and say, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this right. We're going to implement these systems, and not just implement the systems, but make this place better than it was before. Um, I have ideas on it, but I'm just a guy podcasting out of my little studio here. The one thing I will say about this, and then we'll get into chat and we'll do some meet and read here. The one thing I will say about this is we went to two separate restaurants over the weekend. One is like where everybody in Kerrville goes, and I it's the first time I've ever been there. But everybody goes there, and it's spectacularly mediocre. It's a Mexican restaurant. It's called Mamacita's. It's huge, and it has an environment on the inside which is big and festive, and like in some ways you're kind of going there for the environment, along with the mediocre food. And when we were there, we saw a whole table filled with guys from Louisiana, like they were here. Um, there are fire departments and rescue teams from all over Texas and other parts of the country. You had the Bayou Navy here, and they brought in their pontoons, and they were very very helpful during Harvey down in Houston. So in a lot of ways, this has been a very Aquarian kind of event as well, where this is the one thing about America. America responds. We had fire departments all the way up from Odessa, Texas here. Um, Richardson. I mean, all over the place. And again, even out of state. So that part of the experience has been pretty inspiring in a lot of ways, and is always, to me, it's like a reminder of what Americans do really well. Is that we respond, we reach out, we help, we volunteer, we donate. There's a place that sells tiny homes and sheds and shit like that on the highway. And there's a big sign that says, "Come on in for free coffee, water, and a hug." I mean, you'll see this all over town, and it's still going. I mean, where are we now? 2 weeks, 16 days. We're 2 weeks. We're over 2 weeks, and the same kind of energy and almost the same numbers are still here. It's pretty mind blowing. We went to another restaurant, and the national FEMA guys were here, and they were eating at this. So there is a major, major effort to deal with the situation at hand, which I really appreciate. And with Mars and Virgo, I think if you're going to have a disaster, you may as well have some Mars and Virgo action, right? Which would be, just pure service, inaction, and really getting down into the gritty, which is what Virgo does. So you can see some of these things play out, even as this event unfolds, um, really fast. And even Jupiter in Cancer, which astrologically we looked at this, and at the time of the high water, the ascendant was Cancer, Sirius is on the ascendant, the Sun was on the ascendant, and Jupiter wasn't far behind. So you could just see the impact of the water astrologically. And then, of course, the moon moves into Scorpio right at about 5:30 in the morning. Dark water, real dark water. And prior to that, it'd been in Libra, and it was close to the degree of the eclipse here in October of 2023. We went into that a couple of weeks ago, like right after the event. But you can see these things get played out astrologically in real time, which to me makes astrology just so fascinating, where you can make these correlations. You can actually see it in action. Um, yeah, I guess if you're going to have a flood, you may as well have Mars in Virgo so that it's all hands on deck. Anyway, we're going to get into the Mercury retrograde tonight, and don't know how long I'm going to stream tonight because it's been a pretty intense week around streaming. But and I always say that, and 3 hours later I'm done. But we're going to get into Mercury retrograde tonight, and the majority of it is going to be around this what's happening now in Europe and something called remigration, which is a perfect term when we're using Mercury retrograde. Anytime you throw a re in front of something, it is a classic example of the application of Mercury retrograde. So remigration is going to be a topic. We'll get to it a bit later. There's a few other examples that are related to it, but not specifically about what's going on in Europe. What I think is going to be um, a very interesting movement, and how countries are going to respond to people who, it feels like the tide is turning a bit here with with this unabated wave of migration. It really, for the most part, starts right around what 2013, right around there. We'll cover some of that too. All right, Cajun Navy. That's it. Thank you, Shelley. Cajun Navy. I called them. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Shelley Meyer. Yep, they're there too. Yeah, and this is the beautiful thing, man. About Americans get a bit of a bad rap around the world, and sometimes it's deserved because our so-called leaders have been sending us into foreign countries. Oh, since I don't know, since we went into Puerto Rico or the Philippines or wherever with Teddy Roosevelt, but most recently post 9/11, and are what I would call absolutely failed efforts for regime change, whether it was Iraq or Libya or Afghanistan, which are the three main players. Syria was a regime change operation too. But we have a terrible track record of regime change, and yet it is still one of the more favored options of the interventionists, known as the generally the neocons. So we look at that, and we look at the impact of that upon the world, and it doesn't really look really good. And the hard part is separating that out from the government or whoever is making these unilateral decisions to engage in regime change versus the people. Right? There are many people that didn't want America to go to war in Iraq or Afghanistan, or to go in and essentially kill Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And by the way, Muammar Gaddafi, he what Gaddafi did, Gaddafi was experiencing a lot of issues around sanctions. And this is where it all starts, right? It's all in the sanctions. And eventually, the government says, look, you do X, Y, and Z, and we will lift the sanctions. And the X, Y, and Z for Gaddafi was basically disarmament. And he agreed to it. He agreed that if we are engaged in disarmament and we show you that we've disarmed, kind of like what they've been doing with Iran and their nuclear whatever, um, we'll lift the sanctions. And to the credit of the United States, they held up their end of the bargain, but it also left Gaddafi completely defenseless. So that when it came time to go in and remove him, Libya didn't have a whole hell of a lot of uh, ability to defend itself. So they declawed Libya, and then they went in and well, you know what happened. So it's very difficult sometimes to separate out the people from the actual workings of the government itself. And this is one of the challenges, I think, at times of being an American. We don't always agree with our government. In many cases, we don't. And ultimately, we're the ones that are holding the bag. We're the ones that are taking the fault. We're the scapegoats. Oh, these Americans, Americans this, Americans that. And at the end of the day, nobody voted on those wars. Nobody voted on those regime changes. Those were all set up for them thanks to the Patriot Act and Project for a New American Century. Again, nobody, our theoretical congressmen or congresswomen and senators voted on that. But if you were in public office at that time and you didn't vote on that, how would that look in your voting record? There's probably a pretty good chance you don't get reelected, right? It's like, what? Do you hate America? Do you hate America? Do you not want to support the Patriot Act? And most people are in a state of shock and trauma still after 9/11. So you can't really go in and tell them with a sense of clarity why this is happening. They don't want to hear it. And this is part of the challenge is these black and white terms. And this there's not a lot of room for nuance, and especially after a crisis. So, but we do respond as a people, and I think we do a really good job of it. And this goes even back to Katrina, where people from all over the country were going down to help the folks in Louisiana, and the Bush administration wouldn't let them in. They wouldn't let them in. They kept them. They kept them from going into I forget which ward it was, but and for reasons, good reasons, right? The reasons were is that that was a situation that was a lot dirtier than people really understand. Like they blew the locks, which helped increase the flooding even more. So they didn't want anybody coming in from the outside to look at it and discover what had been done. And they were like, no, no, thanks. We'll handle this situation. We'll take care of it. And if you notice that all these other disasters post Katrina, that hasn't happened. Like nobody in Houston uh, told the Cajun Navy not to come, right? No, nobody told any of these first responders, hey, stay out. We got it here in Kerrville. But for reasons that I believe we know, in Katrina, that did not happen. I mean, there were fire brigades that had come all the way from Massachusetts ready to help. And get turned away, which is one of the tragic stories around Katrina. Again, this is a very Mercury retrograde moment because we're replaying these disasters and how they, got played out in real time. Anyway, that's kind of where we're starting tonight. We'll look at the chart of the moment. We'll get into it. We'll explore this idea of remigration, which is going to be a big thing over the course of the next few weeks. If you have the ability to track it, it's not something you're going to hear a lot about on the mainstream media. They don't want people talking about it. They don't want this thing to catch fire. And I'll tell you, to the degree that they don't want you to do it, is I did a search on Google prior to the show for remigration, and you don't find a lot. And what you do find is always going to be loaded on the algorithmic side to telling a different part of the story and really not the one you're looking for. This is what Google has become really, really good at. They lead you into a bit of a different direction. In the old days of Google, if you went about 4 or 5 layers deep on the search, you might run across something. That's not even the case anymore. So if I want to get an unabated look at a topic that Google's going to bury or not even address. I use Yandex as the search engine. If you haven't used Yandex, I would recommend it. It's not perfect, but when I put up remigration in Yandex and I look for images, they were it was like night and day. Like it was like, well, this search engine clearly has a lot of information about the subject at hand, and this search engine seems to be avoiding it at any cost. And that in and of itself is very Mercury retrograde like, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to go back, or we're trying to piece things together. We go down this path and there's nothing there. So we reroute, we go down another path, and all of a sudden, well, look at this. Look at all these stories. Look at all these images. And just to give you an example, and this, by the way, does slot into Uranus and Gemini as well. And that if you go into Google and you look at remigration, or there was a mosque in Spain that got set on fire, what you'll see on Google is a bunch of images that are questioning the veracity of the image. And apparently, there was somebody who used an image of another fire and attached it to this mosque that was burning. I believe the place is called Ciara or something like that. And so, what you get is you get like the Snopes version of it through Google. And if you go through Yandex, you won't find that. Google is there to promote this idea that there is disinformation and propaganda. And so, if you have any kind of spark of curiosity, and you say to yourself, well, let me go see, I've heard about this thing. Let me go in there and let me do a search. What Google will do is they'll take you into a cul-de-sac, so that if you're kind of a newbie, or you're curious, what you're going to find is that the officially sanctioned story is really marked by fact checking, and then you'll also get, which is interesting too, because this came up for me as well. What you'll also get is you'll get search results for how Spain has become this model economy for migrants. Right. So not only will they not give you like what's happening on the streets, they'll give you articles that are counter to actually what you're looking for. And again, so if you're using the search engine to gather information and figure out what's going on, Google is not your friend. Google will algorithmically create the narrative that they want people to understand. And so people will go in and they'll say, well, there's nothing to see here. Let's move on. And that's not true. Right? But again, that's very Uranus and Gemini, right? And we've been talking about this whole idea of like we were in one part of this metaphysical domain, and then Uranus and Gemini kicks in, and we're in another part of this metaphysical domain, based on a number of things that we've already talked about, some of which we'll cover again tonight. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing with search. They're going to give you, particularly Google, they're going to give you the version of reality they want you to see. And what they want to do is shut down any kind of inquiry where people want to find out more about something that's going on. And again, if you are kind of on the fence or just mildly interested, you're going to just see nothing to see here. Move on. You go into Yandex, and all of a sudden there's article after article after article after article, and you're not going to get, oh, isn't it great? Spain is the model country that's been able to integrate migrants and their economy is booming. That's what you get on Google. You're not going to get that in some other places. So this is one of the reasons why I'm talking about it is because it's going to be happening. But is the mainstream media and even versions of the so-called alternative media, are they going to be representing it in a way that is factual or even at all? We'll get into it more tonight. Okay. Let's see. Let's do a quick little roll call here, and we'll jump into the rest of the show. Of course, we've got DJ MC at the top. Meow Meow. There's Barbara Boots. Charlie, my man. Let's see. Ryan, what's up, Ryan? Desiree Conrad, good evening. Oh, about this week is kicking my ass. Wow. Yeah. Hang in there, Desiree. Yeah, we've been posting more on locals lately. Come on over and join the party. I'll have some more dispatches from Kerrville as I put them up there. Glenna Spank, hi, Glenna. Yes, please hit the like and subscribe and notify. Thank you. Charlie's having a nice night in Biloxi. Is Scotty Scheffler the greatest golfer ever, or what? I don't know. He seems to be quite good, but I'm not sure if you can talk about him in Jack Nicklaus kinds of terms yet. I'd hold off on that, Charlie. Maybe the best golfer currently. Salty Cow, thanks, Joe. We'll put that up there. Like and subscribe. Appreciate that. Tom Jordan's here. Miss Nikki's here. Yes, you can sign up for a reading right there. Thank you, Tom. Here we go. A wild show with Robert. Well, Catherine. Now I'm feeling pressured. Now I got to make it. I was going to come in and just be factual tonight, but I guess I got to go from mild to wild. I'll do my best to turn it up. Ms. Behaving too. Thank you. Nice to see you. Yes, if you feel like buying yours truly a coffee, even at night, please do. There's Lynette Jardine. Hi, Lynette, the lovely and talented one. She's here tonight. Amy Gill, happy joy from Indiana. Staying positive. Thank you. We need people to hold that positive space. Yeah, and if you like this, we have a smaller version of it, Tuesday through Thursday with the Astro weather. Who's on the table? You might see his tail. It's the Astro cat himself. Green-eyed crows here. Lapicius, hi Lapicius. I feel the heavy strange all. I personally feel good. There ain't nothing wrong with that. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Stay in the good space. This is a really interesting comment. Israel is no longer issuing visas for evangelical Christians to tour the Holy Land. What do you guys think that is? And what's the difference between an evangelical Christian and can Unitarians go to the Holy Land? Can the Church of Christ Scientists go to the Holy Land? Can Lutherans go to the Holy Land? This is a very interesting distinction. Hello, there's our guy, Mr. Thor at the door. Hello, Steve. Peter Bion, what's up, brother? Cosmic Detective in the house. AM's here. Hi, AM. Misty. Who else? Ferris. The sea, man. I got to, Ferris, I'm going to call you this week. I promise. We're going to reconnect. Good to see you. Maya Rose, she's here. Sun Sue. I live near Mavericks, which is in Half Moon Bay. That's right. So did I. Yep. Let's see who else. Hi, BC. Renee DeBlanc and Muse Memorandum. What's up? What's up, JJ? Is anyone feeling exhausted this week for no apparent reason? I had a 2-hour nap today. Seriously. I was like 4 o'clock. I said, let me catch a quick nap before the show. I set my alarm for 5, like an hour. I can power nap this thing. 2 hours later, I'm up. So, Peter, I can totally relate to that. Christina Aphrodite's here. Rough week. No, you're mismutable. So it's just so weird, man. The whole emergency alert thing. It's kind of a clusterfuck. Uh, there's Wit from Ruidoso. Yep. Maverick started '90s. Look boy Flea won it twice. It was so cool. Let's put the money with runners second. Yeah. Um, yeah. I lived on the coast, on the Half Moon Bay coast from like what 82 until roughly 95, about 13 years. Um, Catherine brings up a really good point here. I got to bring this up. Seems like every disaster since Lahaina was all incompetent. No water, too much flooding, fires. Feels incompetent on purpose. I mean, clearly, right? If we want to Mercury retrograde this, you go back to Lahaina and the water was fucking turned off. Right? It was turned off, and you had people that were completely unqualified for the job. Same thing with the LA fires. People completely. So there's this interesting intersection between uh, incompetence and well, let's call it willed incompetence, because they hire incompetent people who, and by the way, they still have not refilled that reservoir that was drained during the LA fires. It is still bone dry and belly empty. And then who could forget Karen Bass taking money that was going to be allocated to uh, special services, emergency services, and she fucking invested in some sort of community cafe, right? So there's like they hire incompetent people who also have an agenda. And when you put the two of those things together, it's just a absolute recipe for disaster, or the lack of ability to respond thereof. Ojos Azules is here. Scott's here. Hi, Scott. Hang on. Let's see. Who else we have? Just as long as you have Ben and Jerry's double chocolate chip with a family-sized bag of Doritos. I might have worked it sometime. And Derek Great Walls here. What's going on, Derek? Good to see you. Christine Moses here. Hi, Christine. Leonie Samuels. I don't think your local news is boring at all as an indicator for the rest of the world. Yeah, I mean, if you want to see the twisted guts of local bureaucracy in action, it is on display. Um, Private property rights high in Texas, so are the taxes. Texas and taxes, they go hand in hand. Dusty Blues here. Hi, Dusty. We have a new Somalia mayor in Minnesota who openly says white people are a danger to America. Isn't that interesting? I was, I'm going to throw this up here. Um, I was talking with Masaki about this, and the guy that lost the mayoralship was Jacob Frey. And there was a time in history, not that long ago, by the way, where somebody like Jacob Frey, who's progressive, very liberal, he went out of his way to literally pander to a particular community. I played that dance that he did on Juneteenth. I think he kissed the feet of like the George Floyd statue. Right? There was a time when somebody like Jacob Frey could just mail in his reelection. That's not the case anymore. That is not the case anymore. So, Minneapolis, you are about to be governed by a radical uh, socialist Somali. And again, that's part of the intervention. We had to go into Somalia. We had to go in there, with I guess NATO was there. If you want to see a great war movie and kind of an up close and personal view of Somalia, watch Black Hawk Down. I generally don't like war movies, not because of the violence, but because of the one sided telling of a tale. Black Hawk Down manages to skirt that a bit, and it's a hell of a movie. But again, where are we? We're in Somalia, and you know, basically, doing street war, street fighting in Mogadishu. And then what happens? All those people get displaced. Where do they go? Let's see. Hi to us, getting up. Well, let's give you some good news. Hi to us. We'll have some good news today. California country. They've been talking about that highway for decades. Yeah, they stopped it. Yeah, they actually stopped it. Believe it or not, I met the people that did it, and kudos to them. Let's see who else we have here. Healing Heart Rosie's here. Has there flesh eating flies being let loose in Texas, or Billy Goat dropping mosquitoes, particularly in Texas? Haven't heard of that, but I have heard of these ticks that they're now finding in Michigan that originate from China that are brutal, and they don't even need another tick to mate. They reproduce themselves. How about that for some doom? Let's see. Yeah, our friend Christina Aphrodite lost her dog. That's always rough. I think this is a valid comment, co-host. 100%. 100%. Um, Jack Strom. Hey, Jack. Need another show with you and Crypto K. We'll do something. Yeah, we will do something one of these days. He's great. I love him. Let's see who else we have here. Christopher Brown. What's up? A bunch of tourists. Fucking Fredericksburg rakes it in. Totally rakes it in. User 13. What's up? Good to see you. Um, well, it's interesting. The first time I drove through Texas, coming from the El Paso side in 1996, I drove through Fredericksburg and I said, man, I'd really like to live in this place. This looks really cool. And eventually I did. I was there for what, 2018 to 2023. So 7 years, 7 years in Fredericksburg. Who else we have here? Lana Labonte, fraud, waste, abuse by public officials. Yes, malfeasance of public, which is a trust. Well, we had the social contract broken during Biden. It was broken, and trust was in a negative space. It wasn't like we didn't have any trust. We had negative trust. Yeah, and so Charlie brings up a really good point here. Pam Bondi is fighting RFK over fluoride. Isn't that another Mercury retrograde thing? Like the government basically, yeah, was the EPA, if I'm not mistaken, ruled in favor that fluoride should not or doesn't have to be in the water. I mean, this is after years and years and years of litigation. They rule it, and RFK wants to get it out of the water, and Pam Bondi wants to stop him. That's, again, it's really, really retrograde. Let's see who else we have here. Let's see. Am I going to do the Jamboree? Yes, Dusty Blue. In fact, I was actually looking at places to stay in that area tonight. I was on Airbnb. I was looking at hotel rooms. Haven't made a decision yet. So, Bo, I think you bring up a really good point. Working for the government is almost as good as making the major leagues. No one is ever held accountable and has a great retirement package. It's probably better than the major leagues, for being truthful about it. Hi, Terry. She's missing a hand. Okay, all you chicken psychics out there, maybe you can help Terry out. Yeah, standard operating procedure, have multiple layers of organization doing the work. Absolutely, 100%. Let's see. Sedona Angel, Tarot and Astrology. Nice to see you. Jean Anonymous is with us. Jean Anonymous. Algocracy, ruled by the algorithm. Yeah, yeah, and then Algol, the fixed star that cuts off communication. I think that's a really good. It's a really good metaphor for sure. Let's see. Ask the people in Nashville how the rebuild goes. Yeah, I've got some folks down there. I've got a client friend in Boone, which I need to check in with, who's right at the heart of it all. Yeah. So we're going to bring this up here. Could you imagine me talking about this on David's show? I love David, obviously, and we're simpatico, and we see the world, through very similar lenses. There's not always the same kind of traction in David's chat at times, but yeah. So Serbia is taking on 100,000 Ghanaians, and they've got a 24% unemployment rate with the youth in Serbia. In what world does that make sense? Oh, hey, look, there you go. Misty, the quiet part out loud. It's stuff like that. I'm going to bring this up, right? It's stuff like that that really nails down people's confirmation bias. It's almost a cliche at this point. And there you go. I mean, don't get me started. Janine is here. Hi, Janine. The 88 earthquake, people pulled together. That was good. That was good. I was not there for that. All right. Who else do we have here? USA doing all this for Israel. I don't have a problem with that. This is, this is now, this is a talking point. This is a talking point, and it's a big talking point. And it should not go away at all. Is there a way to negate future potential flood damage, types of infrastructure changes, city planning? These things happened here. We had a major flood in this area in 1987. Didn't kill as many people, but did damage. 2013 major flood in Wimberley, not just down the road. Lots of loss, both property wise, loss of life. It's unfortunately, it's a byproduct of living here. And what happens is that there's a lot of clay in the Texas soil. Okay. So it can only absorb so much. And when it hits an oversaturation point, it has to go somewhere. Right. And if you look at sort of the the Hunt area, which is where a lot of this really starts. There are large portions of a hillside that is on the other side of the river, right? And what was happening is all this water, huge amounts of water, were coming down. And because we'd had so much rain prior to this soil that has a lot of clay in it just could not take anymore. And so you had all this water rushing down from the hillside on the other side of the river. And that's how the, because normally if the ground is just, you know, mostly mud and maybe some silica or whatever, it can it can generally take the excess moisture. The clay can only take so much, and then it starts to repel it, and that's what was happening. And there were like there was torrential flooding coming down from the hillside into the river. Not to mention that the water itself was coming over the river, so it had no place to go. And if you wanted to mitigate something like that, I suppose you'd have to like completely recondition the soil, which is impossible. Or you'd have to remove sort of the hillside of the mountain of the riverbank on the other side, which again would be very, very difficult, costly, and would take away from also part of the natural environment. I think the only thing that could be helpful is that nature's going to nature, even if it's being amplified. But if those people had an hour to get the hell out, the damage would have been there, but the loss of life may have been cut in three quarters. That's my sense. And that's about the only thing I think they could do, with the exception of just having nobody live by or around the river. And I just don't think that that's going to happen. So I hope that, let me just throw this up there because this was the question. And it's just part of living here. It's kind of an environmental hazard that's going to happen at certain points. So there you go. Don't build in a floodplain. Yep, I agree with you, KK, but it's already happened. It has already happened. Yandex hasn't gotten totally controlled recently. Yeah. Yandex, Yandex, Yandex. Hi, Scrubbies. Good to see you. The Ninth Ward. Thank you, Shelley. It was the Ninth Ward. Appreciate that. They hadn't created all these dams. Seems like they like to control all our resources. Yeah, I mean, just speaking for this area, there's no dam upstream, upriver. The dam they do have is Canyon Lake, which is downstream, and Canyon Lake is there to catch all the excess runoff of the water. It actually performs a vital function. The dams in California um, have been mismanaged, and for a number of reasons, which I don't want to really get into. But the dams were not an issue for what happened here. There is no dam upriver. Let's see, Google is evil. I agree with that. The timing is perfect for 9/11 truth. I also agree with that, Charlie. Yep, we're going to cover this today for sure. There's Robin Dan. Hi, Robin. If you're interested in hooking up with Robin, we'll put her right up there. She's looking to meet up with people who are in the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area, either in 3D or on Zoom to connect. And if you're on Locals, all of our information is there. I posted that on Locals. Hi, Diane Evans. Good to see you. How should I expect the Mercury retrograde to affect me as a Taurus rising? Well, if you're Taurus rising, Mercury's in Leo, so it's a fixed sign. Just depends on what degree it squares your ascendant. And that means you have Virgo. What you have? Let's see, you got Taurus first, Gemini second, Cancer third, Leo fourth. So you have Mercury, Leo retrograde in your fourth house, squaring your sun. Yeah, well, if you have some kids, I'd keep my eye on your kids. Let's see, Google creeps me out with all due reason. None your business. I tried to contact John and Polly Holmes in Kerrville. Curtis Yarvin has an interesting article on Substack. Yeah, even people like Curtis Yarvin can bring some interesting insight to the conversation. Moon Sprouts here. Laura E's here. Moon Villains here. No one talks about Lahaina anymore. I know it's true, right? It's like we put all of our heart and soul into these things that hit, and then the energy dies down a bit, and then there's another catastrophe, crisis to move us in another direction. Yeah, I'm shocked in LA too. I mean, I don't know what to say about Los Angeles. Olivia Provorst is here. Hi, Olivia. Lady Lou's with us. I got a card in the mail with Lady Lou and Mom, 100th birthday. Had that, but cool to see. Lana's here. Hey, the Waits are here. What's going on? Susan and Chad checking in from Whitefish. Polly Holmes died of pancreatic cancer. Like the genocide. I don't know who Polly Holmes is, but my condolences to Polly and her family. Let's see. Too bad Phoebe Cates' birthday fell this past Friday when there is no star. I'll wait a year if I'm lucky. It'll be on Saturday. You have to wait 3 years, 4 years until you get to her on a Tuesday. Phoebe Cates is looking pretty good. She's 64 years old and she still looks. She's taking care of herself. She has the money too, by the way. Let's see who else we have. We got Astro Emotion. He's here today. Lorianne from Minnesota. The show with David was fire. I know, it was great. Yeah, the algorithm. I used to play with that too. Isn't that funny? Julian Hartwell. Hi, Julian. There was a woman who was supposed to play at Howdy's right on the river on 4th of July named Julia Hartwell. I think Julia played. Yellowstone is brewing right now. Yes, it is indeed. We've been talking about that. Maybe we take some time out to explore that as well. Road Atlas is waiting for the other shoe to drop. A lot of people have for a long time now, but I totally get it. Kyle's here. Shannon Sparkles is here. Rocky's here. Wait, what? Oh, yeah, there are very strange things happening in Yellowstone. Anyone suspicious that all of a sudden the media is allowed now to spout anti-Israel talk like Candace or Tucker? I'm going to put this up here because astrologically, there's some interesting things that are connected to this. So Candace Owens is a Taurus. Tucker Carlson is a Taurus. Jason Whitlock, who, while not as radical as Tucker and Candace, has still nonetheless brought this up on his show, Fearless, even though Mark Levin is one of the partners in the Blaze, which actually pays Jason. So I think Jason's a Taurus. And recently, Candace had E. Michael Jones on her show. And I've had E. Michael Jones on a couple times. And I actually really like Michael. He's incredibly smart. And Michael Jones is a Taurus. And Dave Smith, who has been kind of caught up in this for a while now, he's like 29 degrees Aries. So clearly he's been a progressed Taurus for at least 30 years now. I think he's a little bit over 30. So there's something about Taurus that if you link all those people together, there's something about the sign itself that is interesting in this conversation. And then you realize that Israel is a Taurus country. I believe it was founded on May 15th, 1948. Now you have a group of Tauruses who are being pretty vocal about this. And in as much as there may be perhaps a bit of a hidden agenda or whatever, astrologically, it's a fit because Tauruses are fixed, right? They're fixed and they dig their heels in and they're stubborn and they rarely backtrack. So you have a connection with these 4/5 people related to the country that they're talking about. And I think that there's an astrological component to it. Um, and for me, it's interesting. Now, as far as Tucker goes, Tucker is a late degree Taurus, and so he's had a Uranus Sun conjunction in his chart, which in many ways has radicalized him. I mean, clearly he's not the same Tucker Carlson that he was at Fox, although you can begin to watch his evolution at Fox. And he's not the same Tucker Carlson who used to wear bow ties. And I do think astrologically, Uranus plays a role in Tucker's um, radicalization of his own points of view. Now, somebody put out that one of the backers for the Tucker Carlson network is, he's from somewhere in the Middle East. So now all of a sudden, you have, people saying, "Oh, well, maybe Tucker's been way radicalized. Like maybe he's on the side of Islam, and he's trying to he's trying to get into the fight for the other side of the Abrahamic team." I don't really believe that to be true, and I haven't read the full article on Tucker's backer, so I can't really speak to it at a reasonable level. But it's just something that I've run across. Um, let's see. And limestone. Yep, that's right. Clay and limestone. It just doesn't retain water at all. Let's see. So here we go. This is our guy Salty went through Liberty Hill the other day. That clay you're talking about gave way, so they had mud flood sections. Clients showed me their fence by the creek, 5 foot fence of posts covered in sand. A lot of it is just the composition of the soil here. It's when you get too much rain, it just has nowhere to go. You're welcome, Tall. Weather warfare, I have no doubt that that's part of the game. We got an Emily Moyer sighting. What's up, Emily? Good to see you. Yeah, we do have to be ready for everything. I agree with that. I agree with that. Yep, 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 yep. Rock people saw a hummingbird today. There you go. Life's good. All right. Shall we get on with chart of the day, chart of the week, chart of the moment? Neil Smith. We got a Taurus showing up. That show with E. Michael Jones was fantastic. He's got E. Michael Jones. Balls of steel, man. Balls of steel. Let's see. The rain just doesn't absorb in Texas. Chanda, a Texan, she understands this. Uh, Guarantee you, a Jew signs Tucker and Candace's paychecks. Well, that'd be interesting if that came out now, wouldn't it? All right, I think we're all caught up. We've had our meet and greet time, which I always enjoy. Oh man, let's see, where are we? Let me pull this off the this. Where are we? All right, let's throw the chart of the moment up, and maybe we can get a handle on where all of this in the immediate is going. If you missed the Friday forecast, I recommend you check it out because there's a lot that's Epstein related, Trump related, kind of on a meta level that I think some of you, if you haven't seen it, would find interesting. And then we also get into the busted couple and the esoteric reveal of the lovers and the devil card. I don't want to go over that again tonight, but you can find that part out in the latter part of the show. I might just make that a separate video. I always say that. Okay, here we go. We're right at that 28th degree of Cancer, 28th degree of the sign. And we're winding down. I haven't really looked at the headlines much today. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on out there. To reference this back to the 28th degree of Cancer. But when we talk about Mercury retrograde, we'll have plenty to talk about. But we're almost done with Cancer. We're 2 days away from Leo. And we're going to have, and I thought this was the first ingress. It's the second ingress. And the first ingress was when Kamala Harris kind of bum rushed the public stage and became the presidential candidate instead of Joe Biden. That was the last Sun Pluto opposition that we had. The first one in Leo. This is the second one. And it's going to be very interesting because, we're talking about fixed signs here. And we already have Mercury in Leo retrograde, another fixed sign. And I don't think it goes all the way back to Pluto, if I'm not mistaken. I think it gets to maybe about 5 or something like that. But this is going to be interesting with this Sun Pluto opposition. It feels kind of totalitarian to me in a lot of ways. When we think of Leo, we think of like the king or the lord or the royal I, not the royal we. There's hardly ever a royal we. But there is a we, and we are theoretically Aquarius, right? We are the group, the mob, the society, the collective. This all fits into Aquarian territory. And it feels to me like the sun moving into Leo, opposing Pluto, we're kind of moving into the realm of hard correction. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out with Trump, because Trump, the sun in Leo is moving through his 12th house now. And what is it going to illuminate in Trump's 12th house? Now, he has Pluto there, so we're going to have a Sun-Pluto conjunction with Trump. What's it going to illuminate? What's it going to bring out? What sort of dark material? Because this is the thing with Trump's 12th house that I've always like pondered about with that Pluto there. And there's something about people that have Pluto in the 12th house that have this really intense need to be seen. Now, you can say, well, isn't that the sun in the 12th house? Yeah, there is that, but it's not quite like Pluto. And there's always some kind of darkness that drives Pluto in the 12th. And we know certain things about Trump. But there are lots of things we don't know about Donald Trump. We have kind of a sketch of his relationship with his father and his older brother. And so Trump used his older brother, who I think became an airline pilot, um, as an alcoholic. And this is one of the reasons why Trump supposedly doesn't drink. And I believe he probably doesn't drink. Now, he may have some other vices, but he doesn't drink. But what is that Pluto in his 12th house all about? What is the darkness behind the scenes that we're not aware of? And most people that have Pluto in the 12th house have this. They have this, because the 12th house is the house of the soul, right? We come in here, we take our first breath. Where are we coming from? We're coming from here. We're coming from this place. And then when we go all the way around the chart, where do we wind up? We wind up here. It's either a hospital or some kind of senior care facility or something like that, right? We linger here, we linger here, we linger here, and then we go back out here. So there's all these institutional layers of the 12th, which we've talked about numerous times, hospitals being one of them. But ultimately, once you get past the institutional part, there's another layer to it. And the layer is the soul. So when people have Pluto in the 12th house, it almost feels to me like, they're living with a hell realm. But the hell realm is very private, and not a lot of people know about it. And not a lot of people who have that get into it and talk about it and extrapolate on it. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Muhammad Ali had Pluto in the 12th house. Because, and so you can see what might have driven Muhammad Ali. He grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. He had to deal with racism. He had to deal with all, the white water fountain and black water fountain, right? Like, I could see that Pluto driving Ali. I could totally see that. And him wanting to transmute that, right? There's a deep, deep wounding and pain, and generally, again, I'll use the word like dark secret, because the 12th house is occulted. And in Leo, for Trump, I believe it has to do with his childhood, his upbringing, his relationship with his father, his relationship with his own children, which is very much Leo-like, right? So he's got a whole book of secrets in that 12th house of Pluto. And now here comes the sun. And it's not your typical solar transit through Donald Trump's 12th house, because it was there last year. And would we be talking about the Sun Pluto conjunction? Maybe as it relates to like maybe what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania or something like that, whatever. Right. But not in the same terms. So we have again this source of illumination, Sun and Leo, coming in and hitting Trump's Pluto. Why don't we let me just tee his chart up just so you guys can see it. So he has Pluto at 10 degrees. I'm just going to share this tab with you right now. He has Pluto at 10 degrees. Right? So the sun will be exact on his Pluto in 12 days. Right here. And this is what I'm referring to as illumination. And this is the dark. This is the dark of Trump's chart. Now, some of you have heard me talk about this before, but if you haven't heard it before, you'll find this interesting. Jared Kushner's true node is in Leo, and it's right on top of Trump's Pluto. And I remember when I first saw that, I thought to myself, he's a succubus. He's behind the scenes, and his direction in this lifetime is to tap into Pluto as P for Trump's power. Oh, that's interesting. So 12 days from now, we get an exact conjunction here. But the days leading up to it are also, I think, pretty valid, right? Because down here, let's put some transits in here so you can see it. So visually, you can see Trump's sun getting ready to make this ingress. There's Mercury retrograde. It's going to hit Trump's Pluto. And then down here, we have Pluto. And then we will have a Sun-Pluto opposition. One of the things I wanted to talk to David about, which we didn't really get a chance to the other night, is this Saturn transit through Trump's 8th house. Now, it does go back to 25 degrees, which puts it right there, but still in the 8th house. And next year, when it moves forward at the same time with Neptune in February, it's going to oppose Trump's Pluto, and Trump is going through a Neptune, and Trump's going through a Neptune opposition as well. Yeah. So when you have Saturn going through your 8th house, it is like a metaphorical death. And it feels to me like Saturn just went into this ingress, and it's been in this wide opposition with Neptune. And there was something that we saw about Trump recently. And a lot of people will say that his numbers are up and he's rallying the MAGA troops, but I don't really agree with that. I think he's incredibly vulnerable right now, and not vulnerable in a way that somebody who's I don't know, kind of a reject of society or somebody who's had their lives turned upside down is vulnerable, meaning that these areas of his life that are occulted and hidden can come to light, but also the Saturn-Neptune opposition, um, for me, is kind of a weakening in some ways. And Saturn is in its fall in Aries, so it's not the best place. And going through the eighth, anytime you have Saturn go through the eighth house, it is a metaphorical death, a metaphorical death. And you have this Neptune opposition, and I think there's a lot of scapegoatism, um, a lot of finger pointing with Neptune, but to little avail. Like it doesn't really work. And one of the things that and I have done my best to be agnostic with Donald Trump in astrology. I don't have TDS syndrome, but I'm also, you know, not a card carrying mega member. Um, but I feel like these are critical phases for whoever this guy is. And the Saturn Neptune opposition makes him weak, it makes him vulnerable. Now, again, he's going to have this retrograde, it's going to go back to 25. So it's not fully engaged. Next year, it'll be fully engaged. But from here to here, right, he is in the metaphoric death zone. And along the way, what's Saturn going to do? It's going to square his Mercury towards the end of the transit, square Saturn, square Venus. Um, I would say if there was a crisis astrologically, he's about to enter into one here, but there's a longer term crisis here. And it's not just being vulnerable and weak to the public. There's also a vulnerable and weak in terms of vitality with this Neptune opposition. I'd be very surprised if whoever this Trump is makes it through this Saturn transit through his eighth. Remember, the three water houses are occulted, meaning they're hidden, and they all have different meanings around being hidden. Even the fourth house is occulted because the fourth house represents your home, right? Your four walls that you live in, and it's a minor occultation, but it's still occulted. You're hidden. You're in your home. You're not. It's not like you're walking around the streets or you're out in the public. It is. It is. I call it a minor occultation, and an essential one because you need to have privacy in your home. But the eighth house is different. It's a different occultation. Literally, of all the three houses, Scorpio, the ruler here, is the one that's most related to the occult, right? And other people's money and other people's resources, what you inherit, and taboo, and even sexuality. Your sexual style is defined by the eighth house in a lot of ways. And so, what is Trump's sexual style? Well, it's Aries. I'll have what I have, or I'll take what I want. Right? That's very Aries-like. So this is going to be an interesting opposition, but really the money changer or the game changer, the game changer here with this ingress of the sun into his 12th house, and it's beginning also with Mercury retrograde. I would say he's on scramble mode, and one of the things that we're seeing happen now is it's very Uranus and Gemini like. Again, we're just going to stay on that topic a little bit. We go from Epstein to Russiagate and Barack Obama. It's like all of a sudden, we're not talking about Epstein anymore. We're going to give you this instead. And how many people have animus towards Barack Obama? Generally, universally held opinion that he was divisive and not good for the country. And I would say he's not well liked, probably more well liked than Michelle is, but still not well liked. So Obama's like low hanging fruit, maybe even literally. Um, so now all of a sudden, after being sidelined for who knows how long, Tulsi Gabbard comes back with a vengeance. Now we're going to go after Brennan. Now we're going to go after Obama. Now we're going to go after Russiagate. Well, can you have that conversation without Hillary Clinton, who supposedly was a part of it all? Or is she going to be untouchable like she was after Trump got into office? The other thing that a lot of people, not you guys are switched on, but a lot of people who are super pro Trump, pro MAGA, and it's like, well, why did the Democrats do anything with this? Now they want to do something with it. Why didn't they do it before? Well, it's because Bill fucking Clinton is all over the Epstein material. So if they go in to indict Donald Trump as being on the list, they're going to indict one of their own, and probably more than one of their own. But Bill Clinton has been this sacred cow, and he's been untouchable. So there's a reason why the Democrats didn't want to go there, because their guy was there, and not just their guy, but Hillary's in there, and who knows how many other people that are on the left or left centric, people that donate heavily to left causes and campaigns like Bill Gates. Why do they want to do that? What would be the reward for that motivation? So it's kind of like what they did with the Cold War, and has been going on with the Cold War. Well, so it's over now. But there was this idea that the United States had enough nuclear weapons, if you believe that or not, to blow up the world 3 times over. And the Russians had the same. So what they did is they canceled each other out. And therefore, the nuclear weapons could be used against each other. It's part of game theory. It's the same thing with like the Epstein material, which is nuclear. Both sides have enough explosive material to destroy the other side. And so they agree not to destroy each other. And that's been the tacit agreement with not just Epstein, but just about any corruption and any scandal. And in that regard, they're completely a uniparty because they're all being protected by the same damning information that would take probably half the House and Senate and whoever else down, right? So they agree. Something changed. Now we can talk about Uranus coming off of his midheaven and Algol, and all of a sudden his tongue is untied, and he flips the script. And the thing that David and I talked about on Wednesday night, I saw another commentator who's not astrological at all hit on this topic, is that if you go back and you listen to Trump about Epstein, he's not fully committed, but he's also not ruling it out, right? He finds this way to kind of thread the needle and give people the sense that he's going to go into it He's going to open it up. He's going to uncover everything. But it's just a sense. He's not on the campaign trail every day. And by the way, when I get in there, we are going to finally get to the bottom of this Jeffrey Epstein. Like, he doesn't go there. But if people ask him about it, he is kind of halfway committed. But not to the point where you could go back and you said this, and you said this, and there are versions of that, but they're not full throated like commitments coming from Trump. So he's very good at that. But something happened, something changed, and it wasn't just Uranus coming off of his midheaven. Now, Steve Bannon, who is a Sagittarius, and Peter brought up this thing with Sagittarians and generals, which I talked about on David's show. It's a fascinating sort of exploration of all these historical figures who are Sagittarians, they're generals, then they seize power. And not through any outward show of force, but more through planning, strategy, and being available. The Steve Bannon would qualify because he's a Sagittarius, but he's got a big mouth, and he draws way too much attention to himself. So he's not one of these guys who can sort of play the role of the long-term strategist and not draw any attention to himself. So he doesn't play that role. He's more of the kind of bloviating, truthful Sagittarian, which I don't have a problem with, right? But it's always weird trying to figure out where Bannon is coming from. So Bannon says that there's a coup now to take Donald Trump out. I don't necessarily think he's wrong, by the way. But when you get into the 12th house, we're talking about hidden enemies, right? And Mercury retrograde. Who is behind the coup? Or what is behind the coup? One of the things I talked about with David is, again, it's in this whole kind of good general sort of analogy. And the one guy that fits the role as the good general in the Trump administration is Marco Rubio. And we talked about that. Do I have this chart up here? Let's see if this chart. I'm just going to search. This would be a lot easier for me to go through all these different names that probably people don't want to see. So we don't have Rubio's birth time, but you can see what I'm talking about here. This is the kind of the illustrative point that I wanted to show, is that there's the sun, he's a Gemini, right? But here we have Jupiter and Neptune in Sagittarius. Again, I don't know what time he's born. There's no birth time, so I just put him at noon. But this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, if we were to flip this, and let's say we put Rubio's Sun, Saturn in the third house, okay? And then as we ascend the chart, Jupiter-Neptune would be up here, and you wouldn't be able to kind of see who Rubio is or what he's doing, because Neptune is like this cloud. It's like cloud cover over his sun. And you have Neptune, Jupiter, the retrograde. And the idea with here is that, well, they'll be indispensable, kind of unconditional, right? Like, that's how Rubio has sort of acquitted himself through this. And he has his south node at 17 degrees in Leo, right? Which is going to be kind of close to Trump's Pluto. we get that? Can we get that? Let's go back. So yeah, so Rubio South Node is in a 7-degree conjunction with Trump's Pluto, and his Mars is in Aquarius. Now, a lot of people think that the sixth house is the seventh house is open enemies. Yeah, I guess because you're having to deal with them. But I always felt like if we're just going on the oppositional axis, if the 12th house is hidden enemies, the sixth house should be open enemies. And I remember when Mars, there was a transit of Mars going through Trump's sixth house. This is back when he was president. And that's when Omarosa wrote her book on Trump. It was published, and she's also an Aquarian. And it's like, oh, look at that. Yeah, she's an open enemy because the book is not very. That's such a weird relationship, isn't it? Like he had her around for all that time. He actually like brought her into the White House, and then being an Aquarian, she flipped on him, wrote a book, thought it would be successful, and maybe get her a place on the View or something. I don't know. Very weird relationship with that woman. And anyway, Marco Rubio's Mars is here, but it's also this South Node, right? And do I think Rubio is involved in a coup? Maybe, maybe. I'll tell you who I do think is involved in a coup. JD Vance. JD Vance is a Leo, and his sun is right over here, right? It is very close in conjunction with Trump's Pluto. And what did JD Vance do last week? JD Vance flew to Montana to meet with Rupert Murdoch. Isn't that interesting? Rupert Murdoch owns the Wall Street Journal, which just published this series of birthday greetings from various people to Jeffrey Epstein, including one from Donald Trump. Now, is there a connection between JD Vance and the meeting with Murdoch and the 12th house and Sun Pluto and sort of this kind of Mandarin court that's going on? Maybe, maybe there is. Maybe this is the coup that Steve Bannon is talking about. Because who else would want to stage the coup? The so-called Democrats? Well, how's that work for them? Every time they've done something, Trump has come out better than he went in. So you would think they would have learned their lesson. This is just what I've heard. I can't give you any source around all this, but I've heard that behind the scenes, whoever this version of Trump is freaking out because of all these things happening at once, and this moment of Uranus coming off of his midheaven. And usually, what happens under pressure is that people begin to reveal bits of information that it comes out. So Trump said something to the effect of that the Democrats ran the list and that they put me on there. He said something like this. So he's admitting that he was on the list. But it's the Democrats that put him in. Do you see what I'm talking about? It's like it's this weird, like I feel like he's got to keep digging deeper and deeper holes around all of this. Meanwhile, he's pushing out this John Brennan stuff, this James Comey stuff, Maureen Comey, James Comey's daughter, who handled not just Epstein, not just Ghislaine Maxwell, but also Diddy in the Southern District Court of New York. Now, keep in mind that the FBI went into Jeffrey Epstein's residences, all of them, New York, Florida, um, New Mexico, the island. They have a shit ton of evidence. And they've had that evidence since what, 2017? What are we now? 8 years. What do you think they've done with that evidence? Do you think all of it was just inconsequential? And hearsay? I mean, we have photos of the FBI going into little Epstein Island and pulling out all these different boxes. We know because it said FBI in the back. Of course, unless that was a Democratic conspiracy as well. So it's not like, I mean, people talk about the list. The list. The list is the least. It's the least. The list is the list is the MacGuffin, right? It's the MacGuffin. What we're really talking about here: banking records, transactions, amounts of money. You know, how many shell companies are involved? Where's the money going? Right? All these things are huge, and people are fixated on a list. I mean, that's massive. That's like the whole financial side of the Epstein thing. It's like what they've done is they've kind of like um, cordoned off all that other stuff, and they just said, okay, he's a bad dude, he's a pedophile, there's just a bunch of child porn, and Jeffrey Epstein, and he killed himself, and that's it. He's dead. Move on. Well, even that is totally reductive. You had all, you know, there were the teen girls or the underage girls. There are all these different players involved, and they've just distilled it down into these two stupid, dumb talking points. And it's like, turn the page, move on. You've been played. You're a loser. And then on the other side, you have the MAGAs who are cheering this on because there are people who are questioning Trump through this, and they're in no matter what. And so if you were on the Trump train and now you're not, well, they know who you are. You're revealing yourself, and they're enjoying this moment. Like that's a win for them. And then on the other side of that as well, um, they believe that Trump is using all of this as leverage to take down the deep state. And that now that there's this talk about Obama, who's also a Leo, by the way, theoretically, that this is it. It's going to start the ball rolling here, and we're just going to go all the way up to the 2020 election, and there's going to be a body count along the way. Now, I ask you, do you think anything is going to happen to Barack Obama? Seriously. Seriously, do you think anything's going to happen to Barack Obama? Do you think Barack Obama doesn't have dirt on people? Of course he does. Of course he does. Barack Obama, by the way, is, I don't know if he's got more money than Donald Trump, but he's got a lot of money. A lot of money set up by Lolo Sotero. So Barack Obama has an incredible amount of resources. Now, I can be completely wrong, but I don't see Barack Obama going to court or being in an orange jumpsuit, hands in cuffs, going off to jail. But that's where the energy is now, right? All these people are cheering this on, and what's amazing to me throughout all this is that there's a certain portion of that community that just wants to destroy the Democrats. Let's say it's time to destroy. We're going to destroy the Democrats. Okay. Well, let's say you do. What good is that going to do? I mean, are we just going to be run by like the Mike Huckabees and the Pam Bondies and the Donald Trumps of the world without any kind of check or balance? And I know that the Democrats are not a great example of it, but you get into like their version of governance, and it feels like monocropping. And monocrops don't always do very well. You have to have some other thing to kind of, I mean, that's how they set it up, right? Checks and balances. Unfortunately, the radicalization of the Democrats and left changed a lot of that. Anyway, I just don't see Obama doing any time for this. And what it's doing is it's taking attention away from Trump completely turning on his base and telling them that they're feckless and weak and they got played by the Democrats and I don't need you. And there are some people who say, well, he's doing that for a reason because he wants to make sure that he sells this thing so hard that they don't see where he's coming from. I'm like, miss me with the 5D chess. You had 4 years to do this. And yeah, I know he was embattled and all this other shit that was going on. Right. I know he had COVID-19, all these other things. But they took enough time to deal with Jeffrey Epstein in 2017. Dershowitz got into the Jufrey file and kind of relitigated the whole thing. And then he's off, right? He's off to the Southern District of New York. Well, hell, you're halfway there. Like you've already made a move on the guy. So it's not like all these other impediments kept them from doing that. But before they can even dig in, well, all of a sudden, he killed himself. And by the way, there are 3 minutes of the video missing, not one, 3. So this idea that the systems are so old that they just have to keep reusing this videotape, that may be true, but there are 3 minutes missing. A lot can happen in 3 minutes. So just by happenstance, all this happens, right? If you're Bill Barr or Donald Trump, and Epstein is not just somebody who's going to be brought to trial, but is going to be the biggest witness in the history of the United States. Right? He's going to be bigger than all those mafia guys that turned on the mafia. Isn't bigger than all of them together. What do you do with somebody like that? If you're really invested in them, you put them in some kind of a deep protection program. You're the federal government. You intervene and you say, look, yeah, I know he's being arraigned here, but we're going to put him in a highly secure government facility. Hell, you could set it up in New York if you wanted to. I'm sure they have safe houses in New York that would qualify for that, but they didn't do that. So my point being is that they weren't too busy. He wasn't too embattled to get the ball rolling then. And then all of a sudden, whoops, he's gone. And then that's it. That's it. So there's a lot happening here. And just bring it into the Mercury retrograde territory, right? And Sun coming into his 12th house. Secrets are exposed. Now, some of those secrets may be manufactured secrets. Some of those secrets might be valid and real and true. What are we going to do? Right? We have to sort through all of this now because this is the way reality is. So called reality is always going to give you different versions, different models of it. Then you're going to have to figure out, well, which version and which model are you co signing on? It's usually going to lead to somebody's bias. So the next couple of weeks are in this area with this guy are going to be very interesting. And I think we could make a case here that the longevity and the legitimacy of the Trump presidency in this incarnation is under the heat lamp, right? Under the heat lamp. So the next 2 weeks are going to be, I think, very intense as more and more things start to come out. And as we've seen, not just with this version of the White House, but almost any version of the White House, they can create any story, any other narrative, anything else to distract away from what's happening. And you have to take that into account as well. And we're already doing it. It's already now Barack Obama and Russiagate and John Brennan. And that's not to say that John Brennan is a good dude or anything like that. I mean, John Brennan is not a good guy. He's a terrible guy. Vindictive. So I think a lot of people would not be, you know, there are a lot of people who'd love to see John Brennan hang. Let's put it that way. A lot, both professionally and I think from the other side of the line, people like you and I, an asshole. So there'll be a lot of momentum towards that. But again, it's taking away from this other thing that's happening. And I don't think the other thing's going to go away. I don't think it's going to go away. As much as he wants it to go away, as much as he's telling people, as much as MAGA keeps like ostracizing people and shaming them and high-fiving each other because they have the secret codec that ultimately takes us to the path of victory. I don't even think that's going to work. So there you go. There's my summation here on what's happening with Trump, the Mercury retrograde, the Sun coming into his 12th house. As far as Mercury retrograde for the rest of us, I have been really re-examining parts of my childhood the last few days. And if you didn't see Friday's show, I get into this whole idea of sort of the wounded parts of ourselves from children that get triggered and impacted by stories around child abuse, missing children, all those things. I'm not going to go through it again, but if you want to jump into Friday's show, you can you can see what I'm talking about. But for me, yeah, it did. It brought things up. It definitely brought things up for me because when you talk about stuff like this, right? When you talk about these scenarios, we all have an individual version of in our own lives, and I had to replay some of that in my own brain as I was telling you people about it, and let's just say I respect, um, the my father wherever he is, and I don't want to drag him through a bunch of mud. But growing up was not easy. It wasn't easy, and the metaphor that because when you go through a lot of intensity and uh, I experienced a lot of violence when I was young, and when you go through something like that, right? It's like you have to figure out like what the hell is going on. Why is this happening? Who are these people? Why are they doing this? And after a certain amount of time, and you get some little bit of distance and understanding, and not even like distance from not living there with them, but you know, for me, I grew up in a very small family. I'm an only child. It was an only child, so it's just the three of us. When you got more people, the dispersion of the dysfunction is spread across a number of different lives, right? And not everybody has the same experience. Maybe they do, but there may be one or two people in a larger family that wind up getting the brunt of it. Maybe one or two sort of stay out of the fray, right? There's just, it's just more diffuse. When there's just one person and you're with two other people, that's it. You are it, right? You are the focal point for whatever your parents are going through. And at a certain point, and I think at a relatively young age, maybe it was around 14 or 15, um, I realized that I had been born into a family where uh, we were all growing up together. And that's not really what you're supposed to do in some ways, right? Because both my parents had intense baggage that they brought into their lives. And they did a remarkable job of holding it together and creating a life where we had a house and a shelter and, could buy a few things. Like, I really feel like that part of their story is kind of heroic, but it was not easy at all. And so as you know, our lives became a cyclotron, for their past and the dysfunction that they inherited from their environment had no way to deal with it. And when it came up, it was, it wasn't always pretty. But I had this realization that, well, that's what they inherited, and that's what they brought into this. And they were still kind of maturing and growing and trying to figure out who they were. And when things would go sideways, they didn't have any of the tools to deal with the sideways part. And, you know, we're kind of into like, adult children of alcoholics territory, Alice Miller, or what's it, Alice Miller. But there's a lot of truth to that, right? So as I went through the show on Friday, I was also replaying like things from my past, which were part of that, which because I can understand it. And then the last few days, I've also been thinking a bit more about like certain parts of my childhood, which I hadn't really. I don't stress a lot of my childhood, but it's Mercury Leo and it's retrograde, and I feel like this is kind of in the air now, and this gets really into that territory that I talked about on Friday, where unless we heal those wounded parts of who we are, where nobody was there, come in and save the day, and we delay that for somebody else to do it, like Donald Trump. We're not going to be whole. We're not going to be individuated, and um, and there's a certain point where there's nothing you can do about your childhood because it's already happened. It's in the past. But there can be some effort and some energy to do your best to resolve these hidden and wounded places. And maybe they've manifested in a relation with your own children. But for me, this is what this Mercury retrograde in Leo is about. And in general, because Leo rules children and it rules like childhood. And in this regard, it's the past. And it may just come out kind of just spontaneously. And for those of you who have parents that are still around, a lot of times they're not always open to talking about stuff and they don't want to go there. They don't want to relive it. It's like, we've talked about this before. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's a invalid course of action. But if you have some issues in this area with this Mercury retrograde in Leo, I suggest you work it out. This would be some of the best Mercury retrograde advice that I could bring to the table. And one of the reasons why, and I don't want to dwell on childhood like it's some magical thing. It can be, but it's also where we engage with our creative imagination, which is the nature of childhood. And I think ultimately what this Mercury and Leo retrograde is about is finding that again. It's finding that creative imagination that we all have. We all had it. Some of us still do, some more than others. And I like the retrograde because of this. And the questions that come up is, what is your passion? What is your joy? What did you love to do? Now it doesn't mean you have to go out and do it as a living. I love playing baseball. I'm not going to be a fucking baseball player, right? But you have your own version of this, and it feels like if you want to play parent to your inner child, we're going to have that conversation, that you go back to that child, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, and you ask that child, well, what did you like to do? What were you into? What did you enjoy? Well, I enjoyed this, or I enjoyed this, or I enjoyed this. And I'm like, okay, well, go do it to the best of your ability. Hell, I don't know. Maybe you like going to the beach and making a sandcastle. What's to prevent you from going to the beach and making a fucking sandcastle? It worked for Carl Jung. Why not? Why not you? So these are just fundamental things. And what we're trying to do is not make you feel better, right? But this is, to me, this is really Jungian, right? This is kind of a Jungian deal we're talking about here, because Leo is also like passion and the raison d'etre, right? And so this Mercury retrograde can lead you back to a place where it's like, okay, this is what I valued. This is what made me, like, there's a quote by Jung, and the quote is, you go back into your childhood and you remember the thing that you did that made you forget time. And he says, that is the thing that you should be doing. And you don't have to be a professional around it, but it can be very, very helpful if you can resurrect that. And then I think the question is, well, why did you give it up in the first place? What made you give it up in the first place? What made you lay your love down for the thing that you really enjoyed and said, well, I'm not going to do this anymore? Right? That's another part of the dialogue. So I think it's going to be a very interesting Mercury retrograde in Leo on many levels. But I think on an individual level, uh, that's that's where I would go. All right. So I lost the Trump chart, but you know what I'm talking about. Why don't we get into this remigration thing? I'm going to bring something up here so I can find it. Um, 1 second. You know, the Sabian symbol for 16th Leo, because Mars right now is at 15.5, which would be uh, 16. It's a really interesting symbol. The storm ended, and all nature rejoices in brilliant sunshine. The surge of life and love after a major crisis. This symbol speaks clearly for itself how brilliant the light after the long night of the soul, the battered but unconquered consciousness, finds itself exalted in the marriage of sunbeams and rising sap. This indeed is release. Light and life singing in the cleansed and refreshed mind, flooded for a while by the waters of feeling. It's a really interesting symbol, especially as it relates to Kerrville. This is the first stage of the 28 fivefold sequence. It is a sequence that reveals consciousness at its most inspiring moments of enjoyment. But these peak experiences can operate at several levels. The first and most basic level is that of life itself, and that of the overcoming of its many crises, and the joy and power of new beginnings. So I think in order to fully embrace this symbol, we have to go retrograde, right? We have to go retrograde. And then when Mercury comes back to Leo 16, there's a journey, right? There's a journey between now, where it is, and where it retrogrades to. And when it comes back, this is the symbol that it lands back on. The storm ended and all nature rejoices in brilliant sunshine. So think of this Mercury retrograde really in uh, alchemical terms in a lot of ways, and sort of sifting through your past to find something that uh, winds up bringing you joy. It could even be a memory, but this is an ongoing process here, and it's going to be an interesting one. All right, so I just wanted to end with that one. Okay. Um, let's talk about this remigration. And this is coming out of Spain and Italy. And I said, keep your eye on Spain and Italy with the remigration stuff. So this is from a blog called Unheard, and they have a party in Spain called Vox. And I'm going to read some of this, and this is pretty recent, July 14th. Spain has long lagged behind its neighbors when it comes to Europe's right wing populist shift. But that may be about to change. New polling has right wing party Vox rising to 18.9% of the vote, a gain of 5% percentage points since last month. That's huge. You gain 5% in a month? It's no coincidence that early this month, Vox vowed to deport 8 million foreigners from Spain should it win in the next election. The tougher stance echoes the embrace of remigration policies by parties such as Germany's AfD, marking a sharp shift in Spain's debate over immigration. Today, immigration ranks as Spanish citizens' second biggest concern, just behind housing and ahead of the economy. Like much of Europe, Spain has experienced a post pandemic immigration surge, its own version of Boris wave, with around 3.5 million arrivals since 2021. This has pushed the foreign born share of the population to 18%, well above the EU average. To submit this trend, the ruling coalition last year proposed to fast track citizenship for around 500,000 undocumented migrants who arrived before November 2021. While this demographic growth has helped fill gaps in Spain's labor market, which we talked about, and sustained headline GDP growth, it has also intensified the perception that social services are overstretched. Long wait times in the public healthcare system, constant delays in the rail network, and incidents of street crime involving migrants have fueled unease in many cities. In some places, locals have even taken matters into their own hands, confronting suspected criminals of migrant origin. The socialist led government has lent heavily on this immigration driven growth model, relying on population increases in low productivity sectors such as tourism. Since 2022, immigrants have filled out about 40% of all new jobs, but this has done little to raise either GDP per capita or productivity, which continue to trail EU averages. This makes Spain's expansion quantity driven rather than quality driven, with more people working precarious low wage jobs. The combination of rapid foreign population growth and economic stagnation is eroding old taboos around immigration and planting the seeds for a policy change. Vox clearly is seeking to reap the benefits. After the Rocio de Mir, After Rocio de Mir, the party spokesperson for demographic emergency, declared this month that Spain's 8 million foreign-born residents should go back to their countries. The party's president, Sebastian Abascal, watered down the figure, perhaps mindful that Vox draws strong support from nationalized Latin American voters. Still, the message resonates with many who feel rising immigration is unsustainable. Yet Vox's rise isn't just down to the backlash against migrants. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's corruption scandals and the perceived weakness of the center right People's Party play a role. The fact that Vox will likely be needed as part of a right wing governing coalition or through external support also helps normalize the party in the eyes of the electorate. So a lot of times these alternative parties pop up and they're infiltrated very quickly. And they wind up, it's like that's what happened to the Tea Party here in this country. And the next thing you know, the original message is watered down, becomes ineffectual. Could this happen with Vox? Sure, absolutely. It's worth noting, however, that the rise of pro immigration politics goes beyond Vox. The party now faces competition on its right from Se Acaba la Fiesta, led by the online influencer Elvis Perez, which won 3 seats at last year's European Parliament elections. In Catalonia, a territory long dominated by the left and a top destination for migrants, polls show the rapid rise of the Alianza Catalana, an anti immigration nationalist party with ties to the AFD, which openly champions remigration. Its growth could upend local politics and weaken Sanchez's coalition, which relies on regional parties to govern. The rise of pro remigration competitors demonstrates that Vox is far from alone in its platform, and this trend will surely push the party to further harden its stance. It is a sign that the new wave of right wing populism, driven by mass migration, is firmly taking root in all corners of Europe. I do believe, I agree with that. It's starting to happen. And the factors are number one, oversaturation. Number two, a general lack of being able to integrate with the local populace. Number three, the realization that these groups, the new people, are getting subsidies and assistance from the government in ways that the locals just don't. I mean, all these things are starting to add up now. And it's, Spain is not alone. You're going to start to see this in other countries as well. England I saw this very interesting skirmish on a subway. I hadn't seen anything like this in England before for a while. And there was a guy who clearly was not from there, right? And he's walking down the steps from the subway tube, and there are these people going up and going down. And he hits this guy. He just hits him. And then I hadn't seen this, but all of a sudden, like 6 English dudes jump in and they start, going after this guy. And I mean, the dude was fighting like a wild savage. Don't get me wrong. It's a good thing there were 6 of them, but I had never seen that before. And there was this one dumbass lady. There's always one dumbass lady that goes in and tries to break the fight up. Like, stay the fuck out. Somebody could get hurt. It might even be you. Just stay the fuck away. Don't try to play the role of a peacemaker. All right? You're not the UN. I'm watching this and wow, this is different. I haven't seen this. I've not seen this before. And if we look at this with Mercury retrograde, and this whole idea of remigration. Now, there may be some of you who will say, well, there's no such thing as sovereignty. We're all bonds of the crown, and we're all chips for the global corporation. So therefore, none of us are truly sovereign, right? Yeah, you can make a case for that. However, when we look at the sign of Leo is connected to rulership and this whole idea of sovereignty, right? Like every person, like this is the post-feudal idea that every person who was now no longer conscripted and had to solely serve the king or the queen or the baron or the baroness or the duchess or the duke had the right to discover who they were on their own through their own sovereign effort and become a individualized version of the king and the queen or the royal eye. And the I would say that the ultimate manifestation of this is in America, where you have a house and you have a quarter of an acre and you are, the lord of your lair and your domain. That is the micro model of, the lord in his castle. It's the micro model. And that's what happened, or that was the idea, where when you break down feudalism, you get to own your own property. You get to pay property taxes. You get to deal with floods. But that was the idea. You could be the ruler of your own domain. You didn't have to, give up your bride for first night or something like that, right? You didn't have to do that. If the king didn't like you, just take your land. You're fucked. See you later. Get out of here. You may have a case in the court, but how's that going to go? I mean, this was the whole idea, right? And not just here. I mean, Europe defeudalizes around World War One. And this is the problem with the Russians, the Romanovs. They didn't defeudalize fast enough in some ways in order to deal with their problems, which were plenty. But that's the idea, right? Like the idea is now we're unchained. People are unchained. Yes, you can own a home. Yes, you can own property. Yes, you can still tithe the king and the queen, which is now the state, your property taxes, but it's yours. If you wanted to be, I don't know, if you wanted to be an accountant, you could be an accountant. You didn't have anybody telling you what you should be, what you needed to be. And look, it wasn't always that tyrannical in some of these more feudal communities. If you did something generally pretty well, they wouldn't keep you from doing it. Like if you were really good at, shoeing horses, they weren't going to go tell you to bake bread. There's at least some degree of respect and understanding because those things like kept things going. But in some cases, there was always going to be a ceiling. You could only go so far. This is the idea. Like, it's sort of downstream of the American Revolution. And that's where Leo comes into play. That's where this whole idea that, we theoretically have this right to be sovereign, that we have a divine spark, that we can be the kings and the queens of our own castle, or at the very least, the land that we live in, which we're now having to share without any real invitation with a large group of people who are now, in many ways, usurping our property rights and uh, government services and all the things that go along with it. So this is why I think this Mercury retrograde in Leo is important, especially in Europe, because that's where these waves of migration have been happening for a very long time. And I've shown this to you guys before, but in case you're new, I'll bring it up to you again so you can see what I'm talking about. Back when I was at Gaia, I did a show on this, and it was right at the onset of Neptune in Pisces, and I talked about how migration was going to be a huge, huge deal with Neptune and Pisces. And there was this one ship that was used for bringing thousands of men to Europe, and it was the Aquarius. And I can't tell you how many pictures I saw with this boat, right? It's a famous boat, the Aquarius. The Aquarius, there's another one, the Aquarius. The Aquarius. Migration to end operations. 2018. Well, they were going strong for 7 years. And you would always see nothing but guys like that. Guys, you wouldn't see women. Look, oh, look, they even, look at this. They're even being blessed. They're being blessed by Mary. So what happens is that these guys go out on these little dinghies, and then the Aquarius comes along, rescues them, and brings them to their new place. Eventually, they lost their license, whatever. It's like, here we are. Here we are. Come on over, boys. There we are. Can't wait to meet you. Oh, look at that. He's getting a hug. He's getting a hug. He needed a hug. So what's the opposite sign of, look at this. They keep putting Mary in there. Spain offers to take and rescue ship after Italy and Malta both say no. We're always getting that picture of Mary in there, huh? Aquarius. Aquarius. Anyway, Mercury in Leo is opposite Aquarius, right? It's opposite Aquarius. And I always found that this ship at this time, which was the most renowned migrant carrier, is fucking named Aquarius. It's like, yeah, I get the symbolism totally. Well, those days have come to an end. I mean, literally, the ship is no longer in use, but it has brought many people. And like, I'm not saying that these guys uh, had a great life where they were. You know, they've had these civil wars, and they've had these NGOs come in and fuck them up. But really, what they're just trying to do is like empty them out, bring them to Europe, and you know, I'll be honest with you, bring them to Europe, and then you know, mess with the gene pool, create havoc, which it's happening now, um, and go back into these areas where they've removed a large part of the male population and set their NGOs back up again. It's like, yeah, we got the guys who would give us a beef out of the way, or for the most part. Now they're in Europe. Okay, now we can go back in here and you know start our sustainability projects or whatever. I mean, I feel like a lot of that happened. We're going to empty out certain areas and probably where there's rare earth minerals or so instead of having an environmental crisis to do that, we'll have a humanitarian crisis, which we know have been brought up by things like droughts and wars and American intervention, whatever. But the numbers are staggering, like really staggering. And so this Mercury retrograde in Leo, I really feel in that world is also going to be a big story over the next 3 weeks. I feel like it's going to gain momentum. You're not going to see it on the mainstream media or news. They don't want to. They don't want to represent it. But if you pay attention, you're going to hear more and more about it. And yeah, I mean, even with Pluto retrograde in Aquarius, I mean, look at the boat. It's Aquarius. Now Pluto's retrograde. It's like, well, here you go, Aquarius, go back. Why don't we get that ship and bring it back and they can be part of the remigration? I mean, that's very much Pluto retrograde, right? Like, we'll give you some money, we'll set you up, and but who's going to do all the jobs we used to do? I don't know. We'll figure it out. Because my issue with all this, and I have some compassion for these dudes, all right, like where they came from, I'm sure it's very fucked up, right? So I have some human compassion for them. But nobody asked these people in Europe. They didn't have a vote. They didn't have a say. Right? It's because it's the European Union and all the quote unquote heads of state of whatever these countries are. They're just all rowing in the same direction as Ursula von der Leyen. They had no say. That's my beef. They had no say. They had no say. Okay, we're willing to take on. We'll do our share. We'll take on like maybe 5%, whatever the number is, right? But it's a number that's manageable. It's a number where it's like, okay, you're not going to be larger than the group of people that were already living here. It will create some channel of assimilation. But that's not what they did. They're overloading the system. Right? It's kind of a Cloward pivot effect in a lot of ways, but on a different scale. And so that's my beef. Nobody was consulted. Nobody voted on it. And I think if there was a real vote, this doesn't happen. And if it does, not to the degree that it's occurred. So keep your eye on remigration. The other thing to keep an eye out for with this Mercury retrograde is like what's happening with Calgary, and there seems to be again some buzz and some movement about them wanting to leave Canada. Now, apparently, was it Alberta now is kind of leaning in, and maybe BC's leaning in, although I find it very difficult to think that BC would have the numbers. But Calgary is interesting, and we did a show in Calgary, probably about what 2 months ago. Looked at the chart, looked at the U.S. chart, hand and glove fit. Hand and glove. I would honestly, I'd be surprised if Calgary does not wind up becoming part of the U. I'd be very surprised because it seems to me like everybody there wants to have it. And they're like, well, what about all these, Indian tribes that maybe not want to be a part of it? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. And that's not remigration. You know what that is? That's relocation. It's like, yeah, we want to relocate into the United States. We're kind of done here. We are the blue collar, bust our ass, working class, oil people, and not really well regarded or respected, especially when it comes to our individual rights. There's a country just south of us, a little bit better, a little bit better than that. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. As we go through the re-prefix, right? The re-prefix, remigration, relocation, with your own personal journey, um, review, re-examine, re-explore, um, revitalize, ultimately. And it's really hard in this world. So many things are tapping us and tapping our vitality. Uh, but this Mercury and Leo retrograde, I think it's gonna be really, really good. If you go down that path, if you mine that shaft and find something that you love. And remember, it's got to come back and hit that 15, 16 degree. And it's like after the storm subsides, a ray of sunshine comes through. I do think that Leo season in general is going to be good for the overall atmosphere because we've been so soggy, right, with the sun and Cancer. And of course, there's Sirius ruled by Cancer, and Jupiter in Cancer. It's just been so soggy. And now here comes the sun. Things get to dry out a little bit. And there is a possibility that our moods can change, right? Like spend some time in the sun, get revitalized, and get those good solar rays in the morning. Here comes the sun. All right, that'll do it. I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation. If you did, hit like, subscribe, pass it on to your friends. Don't forget, I will be at the Bridge Expo with David on the second weekend in October up in Frisco, Texas. There's a link if you want to get a ticket to it. I still think there's a discount there. And David was very forthright the other night when he was on my show. It's like, that's how we get paid. Like, if people don't show up, David and I don't get paid. And so the more of you that show up, the better off it is for the two of us to be able to go there and get a little remuneration for our time and our effort. So I appreciate David bringing that up. Is there anything else? Yeah, I'll be up the Frank's Jamboree in September. Go check out locals. I've been posting more there, and I'll continue to post more of the Kerrville stuff there and some other things as well. And I think that's really about it. All right. Thanks for being here. Take care of yourselves. Treat each other well. God bless you all. Love you. Robert Phoenix signing off.